Have you ran for office before?
Mm-hmm.
What, for a school
State Board of Education. And so I was on the state board for 8 years. Very different than a local race.
How so?
Whoa. I think the local race is much more political. The state board is much bigger. So you're kind of, I was representing 3 counties essentially. Probably at the time I thought it was pretty intense, but after being in this race, I changed my mind.
Janice said the same thing of it being political.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of interest in the board. I think some of the issues that the board had did not put it in a good light. I think Columbus City is at a reality checkpoint. And so I think a lot of people want results. And so I think they're looking to a new board to be able to do that, to bring some sensibility, accountability, transparency, but more importantly, to work together for Columbus City Schools. So I think there's just a lot of interest in this race.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, let me introduce you. We have with us Dr. Antoinette Miranda with us, highly endorsed Columbus Education Association, National Association of Social Workers.
Yes.
I feel like you go through all the organizations and there's one constant and it's Dr. Miranda. Yeah. So it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Tell us about your background. I know you have a background in education and psychology, which I think very fitting for this body. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I went to the University of Cincinnati. I got my bachelor's in psychology, my MAD and PhD in school psychology. And then I went off to Brooklyn, New York, and worked as a school psychologist in District 23, Brownsville, which is in Brooklyn. It was also one of the most impoverished areas. It was the kind of district I wanted to work in. But I also realized that I had not seen poverty like that. And so it was really an amazing training ground. I really worked hard for the children that were there. But it had a lasting impact because it really set up what I wanted to do for the rest of my career. So I knew I wanted to go into academia, and then had this opportunity to come to Ohio State. And it was also great because I grew up here. So I was actually going back to I thought I was going to live my life on the East Coast. My husband's a diehard New Yorker. And so we found within 2 months we were moving here, and it's been a great move, great decision. And so I ended up being a school psychology professor. And then the last 6 years I did administration. I was chair of the Department of Teaching and Learning.
Gotcha. You grew up in Columbus proper?
Yes.
Gotcha. What side of town?
I grew up on the west side on the hilltop.
What high school?
So I went to Bishop Reed High School.
Okay.
I belonged to St. Aloysius Parish. So I went to 1 through 8 at St. Aloysius, and then went to Bishop Reed High School. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. What made you interested in education and psychology?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I didn't really start out interested in education. At that time, industrial psych was really big and school psych, and I took a class that said, here are all the different psych majors. And I really decided that I thought I wanted to work with kids rather than businesses. And so I applied, and I was very fortunate that it turned out the University of Cincinnati had really one of the better programs in school psychology, had an amazing advisor. And so, and then I found that I just like being in schools and applying psychology, but more importantly, I became really interested in African-American children and how they were learning and why there was this achievement gap. So from early on, I started learning about that. And honestly, I didn't realize it was like that because I had always been encouraged in school and have success. My parents really encouraged me. My father only had an 8th grade education, but thought schooling was very important, really kind of pushed it. And so when I was there, when I ended up getting the job in New York City and saw the district, I was like, this is the kind of district I want to be in. I want to learn from being in this district, boots on the ground, to see what it took. So I just learned a tremendous amount. I will say that there was a lot of kids. It was at the beginning of the special ed law, I should say. It had been in place about 8 years. And there were a lot of kids we labeled LD that really weren't. They were, it was because of poverty. But it was also a time where the belief was, if we're going to give them help, we have to put them in special ed. But that was a time where that was kind of the feeling. I don't see that today. I think we have learned a lot since the special ed law, but it's been really good because I think it does help a lot of children at that time, especially kids that were severely disabled, didn't go to school. And so this was an opportunity. So it was, I still think of it as an amazing experience. And the other reason why it was amazing, all of my related service people, my speech therapist, my education evaluator, my social worker, they were all women of color. And so I always say that we were social justice warriors before we knew what that was. And so we always were like, how can we help this kid? What can we do? How can we get this kid out of special ed? Where can we make sure that they're getting what they need? And so later I really realized that they also had a significant impact on me because, I was with these women who really cared about vulnerable and marginalized kids, but more importantly, how can we give them the education they need in a district that the whole district was poverty. There was no middle class. And so that's really tough. And then I was able to see some principals who also were amazing, did things. So, that's the education part for me that I think made me go down the path so that when I came to Ohio State, I did a lot of work in the schools.
Got it. Kind of want to pivot to where I was originally going. I know part of your platform, you've talked about implementing programs or just making sure that we are not leaving behind at-risk youth.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me more about some of the interventions or programs that you have in mind?
So my area was really also behavioral intervention. So I was really interested in teachers having good classroom management because I often found if you didn't have classroom management, then you implemented discipline, and discipline and classroom management are two different things. So I did a lot of work with teachers, teaching them about how to do evidence-based interventions, behavioral interventions in their classroom to reduce behavior problems. We had a lot of success. I enjoyed working with the teachers in terms of doing that. I also taught a class for Columbus City for a number of years called Rigor, Relevance, and Relationships. Talked about the importance of building relationships, especially with urban kids, because there's something called a protective factor, and schools are protective factors. So many of these kids that experience trauma, homelessness, all kinds of things. And they talk about having 3 adults as protective factors. And it doesn't have to be your parent. It could be a teacher, it could be a coach, and really kind of stressing the schools the importance of that. And so we did a lot of things around that, trying to change the culture and climate of schools. And, I did some things with reading interventions and helping teachers understand how to push students to their max, really kind of push them beyond what they thought they can do. I also had the opportunity to consult with some principals that were able to transform their schools. And again, I always knew that leadership, because research tells you leadership is critically important. But to actually be able to be a part of that and to witness it and see a principal take her class from her school from an F to a C, to see teachers follow her and believe in her and tell them you will work harder than you've ever worked, and they were on board with that. I was there from the beginning when she became a principal till when she went to become an assistant superintendent, and it was amazing, the transformation. I had an advanced practicum there for my doctoral students who did mental health. They did social groups, they did social emotional learning. And so I really saw the value of when you have resources in a school and when you have partnerships and when you have a principal that believes in what they can do to change the lives of kids. It is really amazing. And I believe that can be done, and this was a school, this was Ohio Avenue. So it wasn't like a lottery school. It was a school that was all low income, and they were able to do it. So it was, that was probably one of my amazing experiences. We actually wrote an article together based on what we did in the school. She was actually written up in the Atlantic. So what she did was very, very powerful. And now she's a superintendent up in the Cleveland area.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Is that something that you see throughout the district, or is that something that you would want to see like pushed throughout?
I would like to see it. I think, here's what I think about Columbus City. They have some of the most amazing teachers. And they have, I think, amazing principals. And one of my platforms is really to think about how do we make sure we have good leadership? Because without leadership, I believe schools are going to fail, because that's the person that's directing the teachers, directing the students, saying this is the way we need to go. And so I think it's going to be important, is making sure that we have, I think they do have leadership training. They used to have LI, which is leadership and training, but it's hard to be a principal. And not everybody wants to be one, but I think there is a level. We're at a point where we have to hold principals accountable. Are you turning your school around? Why are you still getting a 1.5 or a 2? What is it that's happening? What is it that we can help you with? Not to throw them out, but to look at how can we help you? Is there somebody you can shadow to look at what they're doing? And we also have to understand we have north, south, east, and west, 4 sides of towns that are very different. So what we do in the east may not work in the west. What we do in the north may not work in the south. So we also have to recognize the districts or the part of town that we live in and make sure that that leader understands that community, understands what makes them tick, understands what the kids are dealing with. And so you can't sit in your office. You just can't. You have to be in the hall, talking with parents, talking with kids, having your pulse on what the kids are experiencing. Because many of our kids are experiencing trauma, homelessness that we aren't even aware of. And some of us, when we listen to their stories, we're just like, and literally that's what I was like in New York City public. I was like, oh my God, I've never heard things like this. 78-year-old grandmother taking care of 5 grandkids, so that's what I was seeing in New York. And so that was really a training ground. And I had something called cultural mediators. At that time, I didn't know that's what they're called. And one of the things you're fortunate in New York is you have people from all different kinds of backgrounds. So when I would test a kid from Jamaica, give them an IQ test, and they would give me a weird answer, I could go to my speech therapist who was from Jamaica and say, what does this mean? And so, just learning about the population. And we have to be willing to do that, really understanding our population, understanding the community. And I think that's where the board has really gotten a ding in the past, not really getting out, not really talking with the community and understanding what they want, what they need. And that would be my commitment, is to see how do we get out there? How do we talk to the community? How do we know what they need, maybe in the Northeast, that's different from what is needed in the West, and plan accordingly. But everybody has to be on board with that. And everybody has to be committed to saying we want Columbus City Schools to be better than what it is now.
Got it. I want to talk about the report card.
Yeah.
I want to know what your thoughts are. Obviously, it doesn't tell the whole story, but what are your thoughts when you see those grades?
Well, and it's kind of interesting because I was on a state board, so we managed to get the report card changed and to get some different things. And so there was some success at that. We also managed to get the grade off because it's something about an A, B, C, D, F, So we have the stars. I think if I'm right, about maybe about 48% of elementary schools got an effective 3-star above. About 50% of middle schools got 3 stars or above, but only 25% of high schools. Here's the other concern about that. All the high schools that got 3 stars or better are from central up to north. No west side high schools, no east side high schools, no south side high schools. That's an issue. And so, some of them got a 2.5, somebody got a 2, so they're getting close. But we really have to work on that. We have to work on the absenteeism. We have to work on those things. Now, we did get a 1.5 for literacy. But I also want to say that we've only maybe are 2 years in implementing science of reading. And what people have to understand is that we had to retrain the teachers, and we didn't have a choice. The state said, you will do science of reading. So that meant the city had, as well as other districts, had to change their curriculum, train their teachers. And so as the chair of the Department of Teaching and Learning for teachers, I had to make sure my teacher educators had changed their syllabus. Fortunately, our faculty do have experience in science of reading. And so it was a mandate, unfunded from the state down. We had people that came in and observed our classrooms, talked to our faculty, observed and looked at their syllabi. We'll know if we passed sometime in November. I feel confident that we will. So it was a whole system, which means you are not going to see results right away. So while it's unfortunate to have the 1.5. I think it's kind of early in the game. I was at Berwick Elementary on Thursday where they had Family Day. And so with the early ones, I got an opportunity to talk to people in the literacy department. And I was encouraged by what they were seeing and their belief that one of the regions, they didn't tell me which, one of the regions is going to hit it. And they were just saying, it is a process. And I think that's what people understand. You just don't go in and say, oh, we're going to use a curriculum and teach reading and it's going to be fine. You have to put all the pieces in place. So what I would like to believe is that next year on the report card, we will move up to a 2.5 or a 3. And the other thing is we have to get parents involved. And so one of the beautiful things about this event, they have books for the parents to pick up for their kids. They were encouraging the kids to read them. The volunteers were all saying to the child, are you going to read this tonight? And they're looking at their mom. Yeah, I'm going to read it. So we have to have parents because kids have to read at home. We can't just do it in the school. So that was I wasn't totally surprised because of the new reading program. I think it's going to take maybe about another year or two before we kind of see the results. But I also want to caution people. The only problem I had with it is that everybody reads differently. And so I think it's sort of been billed like science of reading will solve all our problems. And I'm not sure it will. And by the time DeWine's out of office, it'll be too late. We'll know that. But it's what we have and the teachers are working. And I really had confidence in talking to the young women that were doing literacy, that are the literacy coaches. They knew what they were doing. And that was really, for me, a good sign that they know what they're doing.
Gotcha. I know you are a CCS grad parent. Yeah. What was your experience as a parent? Navigating the district?
Yeah, that was a choice I made. My mother had went to Catholic school. We went to Catholic school. I thought I was going to put my kid in Catholic school. And we moved here. And so my husband has a job in Columbus City. So he's a teacher in urban school. And I just really started thinking about it. And people had told me about Columbus Spanish Immersion Academy. I was like, oh, I want to check that out. Let me see about that. My husband's parents are originally from Puerto Rico. So I thought, what a great way to have her learn that part of her culture, because we're not going to get it much here. And I went and visited, was very impressed. It was a lottery school. And I made that decision that she would go there. She now sounds like a native speaker, travels all over to the different countries and speaks Spanish. She ended up majoring in it. And so she's been able to use that language. So that was a really good choice. She did go through the whole lottery school system, Monroe, which is now demolished, and then went to Eastmore Academy. My son, who is spastic quad, cerebral palsy, so he has a physical disability, went through the special education system. And I had a really good experience. I had several teachers that probably transformed his educational life. Miss Johnson, Miss Barrage, and I'm almost blocking on the last one. It was this high school teacher. I should remember her name because she was very instrumental because she said he should be in full inclusion at Independence High School. And he went to Columbus State. He got his associate degree and is now working as an assistant at Head Start. And so for me, I had to have the faith, but I also believe because my research area was urban ed, and I just felt like, how am I going to go up and talk about urban ed and go out to Columbus City and talk about this and go, oh, but my child's over here. And I also believe that it's the parents also that we have the wherewithal to be able to provide these extra things, and that we could be parents in the school that could be role models, but also mentor other kids. I'm really big on mentoring. So I also felt that we could mentor other parents in other schools. So I will say that for the most part, we actually had a positive experience. I was a PTA president, a PTO secretary. I ran concession stands. did where, had the booklet, this is how much money, how much stuff you get for the big game. This is what you don't get for the little game. And so that was, and really bringing Eastmore Academy's PTA back. And it's unfortunate that it kind of went to the wayside. But again, that gave me the experience of being in there and talking to teachers, talking to parents, talking to students, and knowing what made them tick, what were the challenges, what were the positive things. So for me, it was a good choice. I will say the other thing that I wanted my daughter to have a good sense of identity. I wanted her to have an identity as a person of color. And I wanted her to have experience with people from all walks of life. And that's what she had. She gets along with everybody. She has a really good sense of who she is. And that was also important to me as well. So it was good. We maybe had to do work harder. But here's what I found. You can be in suburban schools, you can be in private schools. Guess what? You're going to have to work hard for your child because things are going to come up. So it's just different things that you have to work towards.
Got it. How do you want the board to support parents? What can we be doing better in that area?
I think one of the things we can do better is get out to the community and go to libraries, go to schools. When they're having meetings, have a board member come out. I just want to hear you. I want to communicate with you. And one of the things I think I'm really good at is building relationships. And so those are the things that I would like to do. I decided to volunteer half day a week at Berwick. And so I went there yesterday. The teacher wasn't there, but they were having family day. And the principal said, hey, you can come out and help us. I'm like, okay. And so that's what I did. And I talked to parents and, asked them, what do they see as important? Why did they come? Why are they in Columbus City? And I think those are the other things that's important because that gives you a sense of why are people here? What do they want? Why do they want to stay? What can make them stay? And so I think we have to get out and talk with them. I heard too many people last night. I was on the South Side at a campaign forum, and too many people in the audience talked about, I called and nobody called me back. We wanted to do this and nobody said anything. And so we have to do better about communicating, finding a way we can communicate, a way that we can get out there and feel like we are not only representing the school district, but we're representing the parents. We are a large district. And when you're in the suburbs and you have 2 or 3 high schools, it's a little bit easier to kind of connect when you have like 7,000 students. When you have 46,000, it's a little bit tougher. So you have to be more intentional about how you're going to get out there and get the information to them. Robocalls, I got tired of hearing those, to be honest. I really did. So, robocall, it's one way, but I think we need to find other ways that we can reach out to parents and communicate better. And that's what I would really like to see if I was on the board. How do we communicate better with parents?
Sort of tangentially related. You've talked about transparency on the board. I know you've talked about like being fiscally more fiscally responsible. We're coming out of a particularly challenging time for the board with school closures, the leaked document situation, and so obviously that trust need to be rebuilt. How do we do that with parents, but also the larger community and especially students?
Especially what? Students, yeah. We have to change how people see us. And one of the unfortunate things is when your board looks like it's a mess, it translates to the school district. May not be true, but that's just what happens. So right now I think we have an image problem. And so we're going to have to work on, I think they have a good person in communications now. I think we have to work on how do we rebuild our image and how do we rebuild the board. And so that means the board is going to have to take a hard look at themselves when we get this new board. Honestly, I think we need to have a retreat. I think we need to talk, and we're not going to always agree, but you want to make sure voices are heard, but also say, is this about the adults or is this about the kids? Because sometimes we get too caught up in what the adults want and not what is needed for the kids. And so I think the first things we should do is look at how do we build trust with the community, with the district, with the students, with the parents. And that may mean at the beginning, just having community meetings, having them several times a month until we reach every single community. And we also have to understand, it's not just like, oh, we're just going to go west, north, south, east. You have east, but you have the near east side, the far east side. They may look very different. You may have, when I was last night at the south side, they made it very clear that's the far south side versus the German village side. And so we have to also be cognizant of that and in terms of that. So honestly, I think we need to spend the first 6 months improving communication, building trust, showing that we're listening to parents, and then also having listening sessions with students. When I did some things as a school psychologist, or when I would do some consulting, I would often say, talk to the students. And I remember going to a session one time, and everybody always wants to talk to the brightest student. And they said, yeah, go ahead and talk to them, but also talk to the student who is a behavior problem, who misses school, because guess what? When they describe their experience in school, it may be very different than the top student in school. And so that way you get a broader perspective and think about, this is what we need to change in our school.
I definitely think when it comes to communication, that's definitely going to be important when we talk about the budget, the possibility of more school closures and layoffs. And I know there is supposed to be a plan from the superintendent in November. How should the board navigate that, knowing everything that the district has been through? I want to get your take on the position that the district is in financially, what they should do.
Well, I think it's also important for stakeholders to understand, because the first thought is we passed a levy. How are you messing up the money? A large part of this is federal and state. The state opted, several of the senators put forth a plan. This was supposed to be the second phase of it, and they decided, no, we're not going to do that. And so they're basically funding us at 2022 levels. Everything else has gone up. So this is 2025, getting ready to be 2026, and we're funding at 2022 levels. At the same time, we're giving $1 billion to vouchers. When you look at vouchers, there's roughly maybe less than 15% are low-income kids. So it's really welfare for the rich, because people that were already in private schools are getting vouchers for private schools. And so that $1 billion has to come from somewhere. And so it's no stretch to think it's coming from schools. On top of that, they're trying to reduce property tax. Well, how are you going to fund schools? Schools, 80% of the funding comes from local, 80%. So if you start cutting property tax, which, don't get me wrong, I think you should, but you need to have a plan. Here's sort of my belief: when the suburban schools start screaming and the rural schools start screaming, then we're going to have a different story. But because urban schools are so big, our loss is even greater to that. And so I think it's important for people to understand that part of this is, and I'm also worried about the Department of Education, because what they want to do is they basically fund Title I, which goes to poor schools, and special ed. And somebody said to me, well, we don't worry, we have federal laws. And I said, I don't trust states with the state block grants to fund special ed. I just don't. I don't know what they're going to do. And so my fear is that special ed children will be shortchanged. So we have to be proactive and anticipate these things coming down. I think it's going to be critically important that we build partnerships, real partnerships with the mayor, with city council, and with the business community, and see how serious are you about really building a quality urban school system. And if they are, there should be some ways that they will give money, and whether it's about the tax abatement, you should be giving something back, holding them accountable to that. So I think it's kind of understanding that. The second thing that I will say about the budget is that we have to look hard at what we're spending our money on. If we're using money for programs that don't get the most bang for our buck, like we're investing, attendance is not changing, grades are not changing, tests are not changing, maybe we shouldn't be doing that program. If there are programs that we're getting a really good return on our money, we should be expanding them. So it means that we're going to have to look at the data and look at very hard and say, what's happening here? What are we going to fund? A lot of people think administration is top heavy. And, I would have to see. Now, I've sort of seen that we have double the number of administrators and we have less students. And so the only thing I would say is make sure we justify those administrators. But when you have a 2 on your report card, then I would also say, what are those administrators doing to get us there? I want to make it very clear. I am not bashing administrators. I'm just saying when you have that tight of a budget, it means that everything is on the table. And you have to look at what's going to get us where we need to be, and how do we make sure the students are going to get resources that are necessary. You know, people always kind of say, oh, we spend so much money on urban kids. But I also say, in part, it's because we have to give more. We have to provide more. Many of them, you know, we have a district that's very heavily low socioeconomic. And so there are things that we have to provide differently for them than maybe what a suburban schools. And you look at our buildings. So it's not like our money is going into the buildings necessarily. I mean, some of them are improving. So for me, everything's on the table that we have to look at. And ultimately, we're looking at what is going to get us to our bottom line, which is to improve the district so that it's effective.
Gotcha. I feel like when this is released, one thing that will be top of mind is transportation. I know the vote that just came out about not requiring transportation for high school students. What was your thought on that?
So I go back to the state never required you to provide transportation for 9 to 12. And so this is what happens to organizations. So what, I don't know, 15 years ago, they decided to pass a policy that says we're going to transport 9 to 12. We were in a very different space. We didn't have, and when you say you're going to transport your public school students, you have to transport your charter kids and you have to transport the private school kids. And then we also have open enrollment and lottery schools. And so a large part of that, I don't know if you saw in the dispatch, we cover 9.2 million miles. Cleveland covers 2.2 million miles. And so part of it is because of the lottery schools, because we opted not to do community schools or, neighborhood schools. And so I think one of the things we're kind of dealing with is something that was decided 15 years ago that now the landscape has changed. We don't have enough bus drivers, so we're spending money on vendors, 20 million on vendors to get them to be able to transport the kids. People talk about seeing buses where 4 kids get off, and then on top of that, we're getting this penalty from the private. And so, and we can give CODA, but here's what I'm going to say, and I'm not bashing CODA, believe me. But so I have students that come from Philadelphia, New York, and they come here with no cars, and they're like, what is wrong with your transportation system? I go, I know, because we are a car city. And when I lived in New York, everybody, whether you were middle class, upper middle class, poor, took the trains and the buses. Everybody did that. And so that's what I did. We had one car. I took the bus to work. It was right on the line. I didn't have to walk very far to get it. And so that's one of the problems is that CODA, even though we maybe have them get CODA passes, I recognize that is not ideal for all kids because they have to get up at 6 o'clock. So we have to figure out, and we have, and everybody's worried about the absenteeism. And so the first thing we have to do is why are kids being absent? Because if we're providing transportation, but they're not getting on it, I'm not sure transportation is the issue. And so that's the first thing people jump to. But I say, got to look at this, got to look at the cause, because the cause may not be transportation. It may be something else. So we immediately jump to that. So, some kids may get transported. I have a feeling they're going to start looking at open enrollment because that costs. If you live on the south side, but you decide to go to a school on the north side, that's a long bus ride. So again, everything is on the table. I would like to see us start with, can we hire bus drivers to get rid of the vendors? That would save us 20 million. And not only that, maybe we can give the bus drivers a little bit of a raise to attract them to come to Columbus. But we also have to recognize it's hard to be a bus driver. And sometimes bus drivers don't want to be on bus with some of these kids. So I think there's multiple things, and I guess the thing that I would keep adding is that when we get up and as a potential board member talking about these. I don't know all the ins and outs. And a lot of times it's very easy to say, no, we can't do this, but you don't know all the things that go into it. And I think it's very complex. I think the bigger a district, the more complex it is. And so I think we have to take the transportation and look at every aspect of it and say, where can we start to cut some things that are palatable that maybe the community can understand. I heard Angela Chapman say, are we in the business of transportation and education? And I think it's about helping parents understand when you're spending $100,000 or $100 million in transportation, that means money's not going to resources for your kids. And we have to figure it out. We pay the most in transportation. We pay the most in operations than any other district. Atlanta has the same number of students. They have 30 less buildings. Somebody asked me, yeah, but do they have the land mass? And I said, yeah, they do. It's kind of wide. So, in a way, I think we've been kicking the can down the road, and now is judgment time. You know what I mean? I think we've been kind of like, oh, we can keep going. Let's kick it down the road. And now we can't do that. So I think if we talk to the community about the hard decisions that need to be made, and that if we stick with it, we'll get where we need. But I also think we need to have maybe a 10-year plan, because I think we're so reactive, like the facilities thing. We've spent so much money in facilities, all these plans, and then everybody is upset about it because we didn't involve the community. So we should have a plan. What are we going to deal with first? Once we see this, then we'll move to this. So for example, maybe closing the buildings aren't the first thing we deal with, because it's not like it's going to make a huge dent in that $50 million. That's the reality. Mm. But that has to be on the table. And so we work with how we're going to get there to get it on the table, and do it in a very collaborative way where the community is involved. And when we're thinking about closing these buildings, that we have an alternative for those communities. And we should be working with city council and developers to look at what's being developed there. Are there kids? Because the other thing is, people see that there's this development, but the question is, are there kids? And so there's places, for example, around Children's Hospital on the South Side, gentrification, development. The problem is there's no kids that are moving into there. So on the one hand, you can say, yeah, so we need to have good data about, here are the developments that are happening. How many families do we think that are gonna move in, so we can anticipate whether they're gonna increase in that elementary school? So I'm a data-driven person. I believe we need to look at data, because data can be our friend and tell us what we need to do. And it always allows us to fall back on it. So when somebody says something, here's the data, this is what it says. Evidence-based, are we making gains? Here's what the evidence says. And so I think that's where I'm coming from. I think as a school psychologist, that's what I deal with. If you're going to make change, you got to have data. And if it's not working, guess what? You change something else. You don't keep doing it. You change.
Gotcha. You mentioned it earlier, the problem of absenteeism, students not getting into schools or not being in the classroom.
Yeah.
What do you think we should do there? Are there examples from other districts where they're, able to improve their absenteeism?
Yeah. I think one of the things people have been talking about is, how do we make school enticing and interesting? And that's one thing you do. I know they did Stay in the Game. They wrote, that's not going to be enough. It's really improved maybe 4%. That's a drop in the bucket. I mean, it's great to have it. I, again, go back to, in your school, as a principal, with your leadership team, you should be looking at the kids that have the high absentee. And here's the reason why. Because we may not need a whole intervention for the whole school. You look at your data, you have, let's say, 355 kids, but you discover that 50 of those kids are your chronic absentee kids. You should be focused on those 50. You gotta hone in, you can do a school-wide, but the other percent of those kids are coming to school. And then we need to look at, why are you absent? Let's follow it. Let's talk to your parents. I was reading an article in the Dispatch, and they were saying that a lot of times parents don't realize that being in school correlates with academic achievement. Now that seems like, oh, of course they know that, but they may not know that. And so the more you're out of school, the more difficult it is. Like, one thing people don't realize is when you refer a kid for special ed, if they've missed so much school, we don't test them. Why? Because they're lacking instruction. So the point is, you don't know if it's a disability or they've not been exposed to instruction. And so, so I think that, I think we need to find and train teachers, their leadership teams, have everybody doing it, that you identify the kids that have the chronic absenteeism. I think it's more than 10%, 10 days, absent from school. Bring their parents in, talk to them. What can we do? Find out the problem. Because all of their issues may be different too. You may have some, we're dealing with homelessness. Oh, we're dealing with a very ill parent and they need to stay home. Oh, they're dealing with this. And we should be saying, so what can we do to help you? What services can we provide? We have social workers in school. Now, we don't have social workers in every school, but social workers can help with some of that. What I say is, this is hard work. There's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet. And so it means you're going to have to get down to what is the cause. There are symptoms, and if we keep treating the symptoms, it's not going to go away. So we have to really look at the cause of what's really going on with the absenteeism. We can still do some things, rewards and stuff, but we assume that always works for kids. But if you're in an environment where you just simply can't get to school for whatever reason, that's the way it is. And things that I think sometimes, we realize a lot of our teachers come from middle-class backgrounds. And I'll give a story back to my New York days. There was a kid, he wasn't in school for like 3 days. And we were like, what's going on? So we sent the family ambassador down there. It turns out they had no heat. He didn't want to get from under the covers. I said, makes sense to me. We found out with another one, mother didn't get him up. So what we did, we bought the kid an alarm clock. The kid wanted to come to school. So we purchased an alarm clock, probably cost us $10. Kid was there at school. So those are some of the things we need to do. We need to get kids engaged in school. Sports is really critical for them. Sports become like a protective factor, gets them involved. I remember talking to a kid who said he joined anything he could after school because school was the safe haven. School was the protective factor. And as a result, he ended up being really interested in science and went on and got a science degree. He wouldn't have done that except that there was this biology club or something. And he did it because he said, I needed to stay at school. There's something I needed, because it was a safe haven. So I think we have to be more creative. We have to have schools where the culture and climate is positive, fighting, non-existent, where there's a sense of belonging, where there's this school pride and spirit that you want to be there. The leadership makes that happen. And I think it's impossible. No, I just think we have to get everybody on board. And this is just me. I don't think we can do a hoopla at the beginning of the year. I'm not saying they do that. I'm saying, but sometimes people want to do that and then go, on your way, go ahead and do it. No, we need to hold every school accountable for what they're getting on that report card. And we can't do it at the end of the year. It's sort of like an IEP. An IEP, you look at it quarterly. You assess it. Is the kid making progress? Do we need to change it? Maybe that's what we need to start doing with the schools, where we're auditing or checking up on them every semester, every 9 weeks, and say, where are we at? What do we need to change? Is your discipline going down? Is your office referrals going down? Why are they going up? What are you doing? And we need to have accountability. And that's my other big thing, is accountability from the board, from the school, from the teachers, from the leaders. But I think when they start to see results, everybody will be proud of that, and then you can start talking about it. I think, honestly, as much as I hate to say it, I think the change will be when you see a 3 on that report card, because that's now saying the district is effective. And so we're dependent on every school to move us to that 3.
Gotcha. You mentioned it a while ago, but you're married to a CCS educator.
Yes.
What do you, let me figure out how to say this. What insights do you get from being married to an educator? Like, what is he seeing that you're like, okay, we should be addressing this, or what?
He was also a coach of football and basketball, so he saw teaching like coaching. And he saw it as you mentor kids, you take kids where they are, you take them further. He believed in being a mentor for many, many kids. He was a father figure. Many of those kids come back and talk about what he did for them. And I think his thing was to be, because he was high school, so that's different than elementary and middle school, but was to be there as a teacher. He was often one of the last teachers to go home. He often supported things. He supported the drama club. He supported every other sport. He was there. And he will tell you that sometimes it was at the expense of our family. And he has said that in speeches, and thank you very much, honey. But I also saw what he was doing for those high school kids. There were times where the kid didn't have a coat, and we went out and bought a coat to make sure he had a coat. So for him, he wanted a school that thrived, and he was able to be in schools that did that, where the kids appreciated what was happening. They were academically inclined. They wanted to do well. And he didn't teach, he taught business, so he didn't teach like science or math or anything. So it's a little different because you don't have to do the test, you don't have to do the assessment. But I will also say that he was very passionate. He went to New York City public schools. So he was like, I went to public schools. And I think he just saw it as an opportunity to be there for kids and mentor them.
Just lost it. Give me 1 second.
And I've also been friends with teachers that are in elementary and middle school. And here's what I found. And I think of one teacher who's just amazing. I've known her since she first started teaching. She just retired. She believed in what she was doing. She loved the kids. She still goes back and volunteers. And I think, especially in Columbus City schools, you have to understand the kids. You have to understand them culturally. You have to understand where they come from. And you have to approach them in a very culturally responsive way. And I find that teachers that do that, do that very well. My husband grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, he will tell you. And, when I used to tell people that he grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, they would go, oh. Now, Bedford-Stuyvesant has changed. It has changed. But he understood about being a student in an urban area. He understood about being a student that came from a large family, but he had both of his parents. His mother was an educator, believed in education. So he also understood what it means to have somebody that lifts you up, that has a family. And I think that's what he had good role models in his mother and his father, but really his mother, who I think he really followed in her footsteps in terms of the mentoring of students. And that was what he really did in his career in Columbus City. And I found that when I talked with elementary and middle school teachers, and I used to tell teachers when I go out, I said, here's the reason why Columbus gets a bad rap. If you're a teacher in Columbus and somebody says, oh, you're a teacher in Columbus City, and you go, yeah, it's really rough, that sends a message. These are people that are paying your salary. You should be saying, yes, and I work for every one of those kids to make sure they can achieve academically. That's what should be said. And so I find that teachers that believe in that love their job, and they often are the ones that do the most for kids, and they stick around. And I was when my husband retired this year, there were about 66 teachers. And I was looking at many of them did their whole career in Columbus City, anywhere from 30 to 40 some years. And I wondered if we're going to still see that. People are leaving education after 5 or 10 years. And I said, my guess in probably 10 years, we're not going to see where we have these teachers that have done their whole career in Columbus City schools. And the teachers that I talked to that did that, they talked lovingly about their schools. They talked about their students. They talked about being in the same school for many years. And I sort of think, like, do we still have that? And so how can we cultivate that we're taking care of our teachers, that they want to be here and want to do the best for their kids? I know that was probably a long answer, but I've thought about it a lot. I think about what makes a good teacher and how can you make sure that they have the love of why they went into teaching, because it's hard. People don't realize how hard teaching is. it's really hard. And that's what I saw, he did. He just really dedicated his life. He probably never thought he was going to be a teacher. He ended up following in his mother's footsteps. But, I think that I was very proud of the kind of things that he did, particularly with the kids, and especially when the kids came back and thanked him for what he provided to them, especially at like when we did his retirement party. And it was just great, to see kids talk about that, because oftentimes teachers don't get to hear that. And I remember I had an opportunity to go back to my 7th grade teacher, and I said, I don't think you realize, but this is what you did for me in 7th grade. And he had no idea. But I think we don't go back to our teachers enough and say, here's how you made a difference in my life. And I think it's very rewarding that they hear those things.
I know I haven't. I should.
See, you should. You need to go back to your teacher and say, I'm here because of you.
I remember the question now. Tell me about, and I feel like I might know the answer already, but I don't want to assume. Why did you decide to run?
I just got off the state board, and when I ran for state board, I was encouraged because I honestly, I didn't really know what the state board did. And so I got on, and I knew I was retiring July 31st. And people said, what are you going to do? You are so, I can't see you sitting home. I said, no, I'm going to do something in education. I just don't know what. So I'm just going to wait to see what comes about. And I was encouraged to run, and I was like, are you kidding me? And I started asking people, and people were like, oh my God, you should run. Thought about it for probably a couple weeks. I then talked to one of the board members, said, hey, people are encouraging me to do this. And they were like, yeah, I think you should. And I was funny because I was like, I don't know why they're pressing me. And they were like, there's a primary. I was like, oh, what? There's a primary? Because when I ran for state board, it was just the election. There was no primary. So I got in, and I thought about, and I said, well, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. Maybe I'm supposed to take all those years of experience, the experience on the board, experience being in schools. And I'll also say that I got experience being in suburban schools. So when I did consultation, I've probably been in almost every district doing something. And so I also have this comparison as well in terms of looking. And here's what I'll tell you. It's not necessarily that they have better teachers. We have amazing teachers that oftentimes have to work a little bit harder to get the things that they need. And I think the first candidate forum, when they asked the questions, I sort of knew my response. Like, I didn't have to think about it. I was like, this is what we need to be thinking about. And it was really all based on my own experience. 40 years, 37 years at Ohio State, 3 years at New York City Public. I did a year working in a severe and profoundly disabled school. I think it was those experiences all coming in a culmination where I was able to take all those things and say, this is what I think. I think I also realized that I could be very pragmatic. For example, there's no easy answers. I'm going to be the first one to tell you there are no easy answers. We are going to have to work hard. And so it's really like, I think I'm up for that challenge. I had an amazing career. I absolutely loved it. But it was also time. It was time to say, okay, we're done. But I still have enough energy and passion, I think, to be able to kind of do the hard work for a district that needs it, and to be able to bring people along based on what I know from being on the State Board of Education, but also studying urban schools. I taught an urban issues in education class for 20 years, and just kind of studying what works, what doesn't work, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and then my own experience being in schools and looking at what made a great school, what was most challenging, how can we make some things different. So, I'm up for the challenge. I don't think it's going to be easy. One of the things I'm grateful for is that I am retired, so I have time to be able to go out in the community, to have the energy to be able to do those things. And I was always present at events. I was always present at sporting events, different events. So that's why I ran. I think that I have something that I can contribute that would be meaningful.
Do you think there are any misconceptions about running for local office that people aren't really privy to?
That's a good question. And let me say the first thing is this is not a stepping stone to me. So it's not like I'm trying to run for senator after this. I'm going to go and kind of really enjoy life. And I'm still going to enjoy life. So that's one a lot of times people think, because it is for some people, it's a stepping stone school board. And thinking about, that's a really good question. I don't know. I know the reasons that I'm doing it, and my reasons is that I believe in Columbus City, and I have always had a passion about how do we improve urban schools and how do we begin to make change. And so for me, it just allows me to do it in a different venue, not as a professor, not as training students, not as going in and doing professional development, but going in this policy area. And I think when I got on state board, that's when I became kind of really interested in policy. I was never interested in policy, legislation, testifying in front of the Senate and downtown, and really kind of understanding really deeply how policy and legislation affects us. I literally started going back to my faculty and saying, you guys need to be aware of what's happening down at the Statehouse, because this is affecting the students that you're graduating. This is going to affect you as a faculty member. And I think we were sort of devoid of it. I also found that teachers didn't realize what was happening down at the Statehouse that was going to affect them. So that was a really valuable learning lesson. And so as a result, I got really interested. I was always been like an advocate, but became more interested in advocacy and how do you begin to do that, and realizing advocacy comes in a lot of different forms. So that became really interesting to me. So I think generally people want to run for school board to help a district. I hope that people understand what a hard job it is, because it's not easy. There's a lot of personalities and a lot of outward things, especially for urban school districts, that affect you that you don't have control over. So how do you begin to navigate those things?
You kind of like speaking on this, I feel like there's a lot happening at the Statehouse, like you mentioned. I was going to ask you, is there anything in particular that's concerning? But I feel like
there's a lot.
It's all of it's concerning.
Well, the latest one is coming down. SB1 happened at the higher ed. Mm-hmm. And I just read that now they're trying to do it K-12. And so that's significant. You're in an urban school that's majority minority. Somebody said, what do you do about DEI? I said, we do DEI every single day because we have majority minority students. Mm. Those students need to see themselves in the curriculum.
Explain the bill.
The bill says that basically you cannot do basically DEI. DEI will be banned. And they're basically saying, don't be trying to call it something else because we're going to come after you. And so that's significant because you're in a district that has a third ELL, immigrant students, and 51% are African American. And if we're not able to talk about these things so the kids have a voice, so the kids are seen in the curriculum, so that we're doing things that we should be doing, having culturally responsive teaching, we're back in the 50s. This is what we've learned through all these years of the importance of having these things where minority kids see themselves, feel like they belong in the curriculum. And now you have a bill that may say, you can't be doing any of that. That'll be problematic. The other one is the property bill. They've already, basically, if I understand it, what they did is vetoed something where he said you can't do like they may want to just extend. So they say they're not trying to get more money. They're just trying to extend it. They're saying, you can't do that anymore. Unless the state finds another way to fund schools are going to hurt. They just can't do it. So recently, superintendents are now speaking out because, and honestly, I will just say it's more powerful when you have suburban and rural superintendents speaking out. And that's what I found simply being on the board, that there's more. Vivek Ramaswamy also makes me a little nervous, but one of the things he talked about was doing merit pay. We tried that, didn't work. He talked about, and merit pay really is because he wants to bust the union. So those are also things we need to anticipate. He talked about we should be doing the science of reading. Okay, clearly he must have had his head in the sand. We've been doing science of reading the last 2 years. There was a bill that was passed. So I don't know what else we're going to do. We're already doing it. So those are some of the things that worry me. And I just find that people that don't know anything about education wants to make decisions about education. Come in a classroom sometime and look at what we need to do. So those are the things at the state level immediately that I'm really kind of worried about, seeing how it could potentially affect urban schools. The voucher, right now that we've had it stay, they're going to be in schools, but they're going to look at that. And the Constitution very clearly says you should not be spending money on religious schools. Lays it out right there. It says there's one common public school where money should be spent. And so it depends on appeal, will they agree with what the Constitution says in the state of Ohio. I also know they don't care about that because when they took the powers away from the state board, there was a constitution in 1957 where the citizens said, we want the power out of the governor's hands and we want an elected school board. The problem that they had is that they said the Senate will tell you what you do. And so, okay, I won't mention his name, said, there's still a state board of education. You're just not doing anything. What the citizens don't realize is they have no say in anything. All the state board does now is revoke licenses. Then what they did, they put it in the budget bill so nobody could argue against it. And then what they most recently did in the last budget bill is say we're doing away with elected. That's against what the people said in 1957. And they will have five appointed board members, so representing suburban, urban, rural, private, and charter. Board's gone. So what I've been able to see is like how legislation that you're going, this is not good. And really, they don't listen to you. It's like, this is what we're going to do. Yeah. And so, of course, I've said, what's their goal? Because they only revoke teacher licenses. They don't have any other power. So what are those five appointed people going to do? I don't know.
Well, I won't ask you about the federal level because that'll be another half hour.
I know. It is so sad as a person who spent their life in education. It's just really depressing to see what is happening to education and how they've been made the punching bag and how they've used funding to cut them. It's very, very distressing. And I think in the long run, I think it will hurt us in this country. It will set us back in this country. And so that's why I think it's even more critical in a majority minority district. We got to help our babies understand you need to go to school, get that education because they can't take that away from you. Knowledge is power. That is still very true. Knowledge is power, but we have to be on the cutting edge. Let's do that. Let's finally be on the cutting edge, not always catching up. Let's be able to do something where people want to start looking at us and say, oh my God, what is Columbus City doing? It won't happen next year. It won't happen the year after, but it could potentially happen in another 3 or 4 years if we're smart.
Mm-hmm. I've been really encouraged by speaking to you all who are running. Very important work, very thankless work, unfortunately. But I thank you for coming to speak with us. Is there anything that you want to add?
No, I think you've been pretty good asking everything. You probably guessed that I love talking about this. And I do, and I think what I hope comes through is that I still have a passion for this, that there's still work to be done and I feel like I can do it. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to the election being over.
I'm sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.